Invitations. We all receive them during the course of our lives. Many invitations. When we're children, maybe it's an invitation to a birthday party. As adults, we receive invitations to weddings, fundraisers, open houses, or graduations. This year, Chris and I received 10 graduation invitations. 6 from the church, 2 from family, and 2 for friends. And even one at the law school, which I didn't count. Jacob, Katrina, Brianna, and Carson, it was a joy to be at your graduation celebrations. Thank you for the invitation. They were outstanding celebrations. And next week is an invitation to the wedding of Noah Roth and Ella Worth. Invitations. They solicit our presence at some kind of celebration. Invitations invite our participation in some event. Invitations raise our self-esteem because they affirm that we are included in something beyond ourselves. Invitations. They usually include an RSVT, a répondez s'il vous plaît, or please respond. In the life of faith, we also have an invitation. Love comes to us as an open-ended invitation. God issues us an RSVP. Everyone is included. And God's love invites us to move beyond ourselves toward God and toward the other. This invitation asks us to provoke one another to love. This invitation asks of us to choose good over evil. This invitation asks us to keep and endure in love and to practice love in everything that we do. God's love. God's love invites us to make that love our own, to embody it, and to practice it every day in our lives. In today's reading from the Gospel of Mark, the Pharisees rebuke Jesus for acting against Torah law, or Torah teaching. Jesus challenges the Pharisees' narrow restrictions on what is permissible on the Sabbath and in the ritual of table fellowship. Jesus calls the Pharisees to live by the heart and not by every letter of the law. It's a call to practice love and compassion. Cutting through a field, maybe a wheat field, barley field, on the Sabbath and stripping grain, the disciples draw the fire, the ire of the Pharisees because of Sabbath rules that violate harvesting. Now, this was a practice that the Pharisees were okay with. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 25, this practice was permitted to draw from the grain on the Sabbath to hungry travelers. But some Pharisees confront Jesus on their behavior. That, no, reaping on the Sabbath, it violates Torah law. It violates a work, something that was not prohibited for work. So what's going on here? I mean, is it okay with the Pharisees or not? Why does Jesus get after the Pharisees on this particular occasion? So we have to go back and we have to look at Mark's time, the Gospel writer's time. And there were problems of economic injustice in Mark's time, and it sheds some light on the Pharisees' response. There was resentment among Galilean peasants about the control that was exercised by the Pharisaic establishment in Mark's time. Not so much in Jesus' time, but in Mark's time, the time when this gospel was being written. There were some issues about the sowing and the harvesting and the marketing of produce. Galilee was a hotbed of revolutionary activity, and Rome had a really difficult time in the time of Mark, probably also even in the time of Jesus and John the Baptist, but more in the time of Mark. The Sea of Galilee and the control over the fishing industry and the control over the produce of the fields was an issue of economic justice. Many of the poor peasants in Mark's time could not afford to abide by Torah law. They couldn't let their fields rest every Sabbath year, which was the seventh year, which Torah asked. The poor, they couldn't leave their fields fallow, or they couldn't worry about what they should and should not plant or eat according to Torah law because they didn't have enough money. And so from their point of view, the Pharisees, which were now the leading establishment in the time of Mark, were enforcing Sabbath rules as a way of regulating the economy that benefited the Pharisaic establishment. Jesus was always teaching about this. Jesus will teach the ethic of Sabbath redistribution. In other words, Jesus teaches us to feed the hungry. When people are hungry, you don't ask questions, you feed them. And the Pharisees will argue against Sabbath restriction. What Torah says, you better do. The purpose of economic organization is to guarantee that everybody has enough. That there's not this overabundance of surplus by a few people. And so, church, I think we have to ask the question, has our nation lost sight of that? Are we practicing economic justice? And I really enjoyed what Zoe had to say to us last week during the offertory about the injustices of taking babies from families. And it's an exact parallel to what's going on in this lesson. The answer is no, you don't. And it doesn't matter what the law says. You don't do that. Currently, the richest 1% hold 38% of all privately held wealth in this country, while the bottom 90% will hold 73% of all debt in this country. The richest 1% in the United States owns more than the bottom 90%. So we have done a really good job of redistributing wealth to benefit the richest few, 1%. The United States has the widest disparity of wealth of all developed nations in the world. The politics of food are no less crucial and contested today than they were in the time when this gospel was written. Eating a shared meal. We do that a lot here in church. It brings us together. We call it fellowship. The meal might be cake. The meal might just be bread and juice. The meal often has delicious homemade cookies. And sometimes the meal is an offering of everyone who brings to a potluck. We eat meals because eating meals together helps us cross class and ethnic boundaries. At all the graduation receptions, it was a fantastic meal. Every one of them. And sometimes Chris and I came away with more than we brought. At the height of the Cold War, a group of North Americans walked across the Soviet Union as a gesture of goodwill, in an effort to break through a threatened violence with human contact. A group of North Americans walked through the Soviet Union during the Cold War at risk to their own lives as an effort of showing goodwill. And as this small group of pilgrims moved slowly across this great Soviet expanse, they were greeted at the outskirts of every single village and town with a loaf of bread that was characteristic of that region. As the villagers extended bread as a sign of hospitality. Governments aside, the act of sharing food broke the rules of the Cold War and transcended the political boundaries of two of the greatest nations in the world. Barriers that divide us from one another and make us enemies. You thought about walking across a large expanse of land and being offered bread. And I do like bread. Thank God I'm not gluten-free. Bread will carry a message greater than almost any message can carry. Bread carries the stories of the people who bake it, be it pita or whole grains, or light or dark bread, rye bread, Afghan bread, French breads, corn or flour tortillas, rice cakes. Bread carries the stories of our people. And sometimes bread is the bridge over troubled waters because it can bring cultures and classes together in a way that no other event can. The simple fact of eating together, of sharing a meal. And as disciples of Christ, we know the power of sharing a meal. Breaking bread is the God-filled action of mutual nourishment. Bread is the product of our hands, of our human labors, the life-giving product of time and earth and human hands, and it becomes the reason that we gather with friends and family around the table, sometimes even with enemies around the table. Because bread is that bridge. It was in Jesus' day, and it is in our day as well. Invitations. Today, we have another invitation, and that is together around the table of our Lord. The chef, or a good cook, or a gracious host, knows how to transform a simple meal into a banquet, a place of communion, a place of equity and justice, a celebration of life. Receive the invitation to come and eat. We offer an invitation each week for you to become a part of a community that seeks to build bridges in the community with those who are lost or those who are in darkness. And we seek to do our best to build bridges of healing and of hope. Let us come as we sing together a hymn of invitation.